Keanu Reeves, one of the most beloved actors in the world, is known for his humility and quiet strength. But during a special interview about voices that inspire the world, he reveals something no one expected. There was a man who saved me, and I never got to thank him. He speaks of a high school teacher, someone who believed in him when no one else did, someone who saw him before he saw himself. But what Keanu doesn't know is that this very man is in the studio, sitting in the last row, listening. What happens next is a deeply emotional journey of gratitude, memory, and a secret that's been kept for decades until now. And before we dive in, where are you watching from? We love hearing from you and read every comment. The audience sat in silence, the air thick with anticipation. The studio lights had dimmed slightly, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a quiet living room than a television set. The host shuffled a few papers on his desk and glanced toward the entrance. A second later, the door opened softly. Keanu Reeves walked in with his usual calm steps, dressed simply in dark jeans, a basic black t-shirt, and a modest blazer. His slightly messy hair, the faint beard, and that gaze that always seems to see past the camera. The audience welcomed him with a warm but respectful round of applause, as if greeting someone who didn't just belong to Hollywood, but to real life. He gave a small wave, a shy smile, and took a seat on the couch reserved for him. The host, a man with a smooth voice and thoughtful eyes, began the interview with a light tone. Keanu, first of all, thank you for being here. You are, without a doubt, one of the voices that inspire the world. How does it feel to carry that? Keanu smiled, visibly humbled. I don't think much about it, to be honest. I just try to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The first questions were predictable. Behind-the-scenes stories from movies, anecdotes about The Matrix, funny moments on set, his relationships with co-stars. Keanu answered with his usual humility, often redirecting praise to others. But as minutes passed, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The host closed one of his folders and leaned in slightly, locking eyes with Keanu. Today, we also want to talk about something a little different, about the people who shaped you, the ones who left a mark before the fame. Keanu blinked slowly. His shoulders dipped slightly forward, and his gaze fell to the floor. The entire studio fell still. A long pause followed, the kind of silence that seems to make time freeze. There's someone, Keanu finally said, his voice quieter, deeper. A man I haven't seen in decades, my high school teacher. The host remained silent, giving space for Keanu to dive in. He didn't just teach me literature. He taught me how to survive when my soul wanted to give up. The audience held its breath. Keanu looked at the floor, then upward, as if searching the ceiling for a memory stored in another realm. I remember something he said to me once on one of those days when I just wanted to disappear. He took a breath. You don't have to be perfect to be important. The words echoed through the studio like a sacred chant. Someone in the audience wept quietly. That saved me. It really did. Keanu hesitated for a moment, then added, his voice barely audible now, but I never got the chance to thank him. The host swallowed hard. There was nothing to add. The story had taken control of the room. Then he asked a question that seemed casual, but carried a hidden weight. Do you remember what he was like, this teacher? Keanu's face softened with affection. Tall, slim, always with books under his arm. He had a quiet laugh and this way of making you feel sane, even when everyone else ignored you. He paused. I was a confused teenager. My father had disappeared. My sister was starting to get sick, and I thought I was stupid, worthless. I had dyslexia. The other kids laughed at me, but he gave me the lead role in a school play. He believed in me when I didn't even know what that meant. The host nodded. Sounds like he saw something in you before you could see it in yourself. Keanu responded with a slight nod. He looked at me like someone who sees a warrior before the armor is even built. The audience was visibly moved. Some wiped away tears. Others clutched their hands in their laps. The host paused for a moment, then picked up a paper from his desk and looked at it quietly. Keanu, before we continue, there's something you should know. Keanu looked at him, intrigued and emotionally vulnerable. The host turned subtly toward the audience. What Keanu doesn't know is that this teacher is sitting in the last row of the studio today, and he's about to do something the whole world will never forget. Soft lights illuminated the back row for a brief moment. A silhouette appeared, still unclear. Keanu turned in the direction the host had indicated. His eyes widened, as if his soul had recognized something his mind hadn't quite processed yet. The studio was completely silent. The silence from the previous moment still lingered, thick and breathless. Keanu's eyes stayed locked on the vague silhouette in the last row of the studio. No name, no confirmation, just a presence that pulled at something buried deep in his memory. The host didn't press forward just yet. He allowed Keanu space to breathe, to gather himself, then gently said, "Keanu, can you take us back to that time? Before the roles, before the cameras. Who were you really?" Keanu's eyes flicked downward, his fingers folding into themselves. "I was a pretty broken kid." He paused, searching for the right pieces of himself in that past. My dad was gone. My mom was doing her best, but we moved around a lot. My sister was getting sick. We didn't know exactly what it was at first, but the hospital visits started coming more often. And me, I was just trying to stay invisible. The audience remained silent, drawn in. I had trouble reading dyslexia. The words didn't sit still on the page. They jumped, danced, mocked me. I failed classes, got teased. Teachers didn't know what to do with me. Some gave up. Most just ignored me. He looked up, eyes heavy with old weight. Except one. The host nodded, recognizing the shift. "Tell us about him." Keanu took a long breath. "He taught literature, but that's not really what he taught me. He gave me perspective, patience, presence. He looked at me like I wasn't broken, just not yet unfolded." The words came slowly, like he was pulling them from the bottom of a locked drawer. He said things that stuck in my bones. One day, I was sitting alone after class, ashamed because I had stuttered reading out loud. Everyone had laughed. He walked over and just sat down next to me, quiet. Then he said, Keanu's voice dropped to a whisper, "You don't have to be perfect to be important." Several people in the audience wiped away tears. The host said nothing, letting the moment settle. It was the first time someone saw worth in me, not because I was good at something, but because I existed. That changed everything. The host finally asked, "Was that when you started acting?" Keanu nodded. "He cast me in a school play, the lead role. It made no sense. I could barely speak in front of people without shaking. The others laughed, but he said, 'This role isn't about performance. It's about presence, and you have that.'" He shook his head, almost in disbelief. He believed in something I couldn't even define in myself. The host tilted his head thoughtfully. "Why do you think he did that?" Keanu stared into the distance, lost in thought. "I think I think he knew what it felt like to be unseen. Maybe he recognized something. He paused, and he chose to reach in instead of look away. The host leaned forward slightly. What if I told you that during that same year, your teacher was facing a personal tragedy? Keanu blinked. What do you mean? He had lost someone close to him. Deep loss. Something that could have closed his heart. But instead, he opened it to you. Keanu sat back, stunned. I had no idea. The host nodded. Because real mentors don't always show their scars. They just make sure you survive yours. Keanu's voice was raspy now. That makes everything he did even more powerful. He wasn't just teaching. He was giving. A long silence filled the studio. Then the host added, sometimes the ones who rescue us are quietly bleeding themselves. Keanu closed his eyes briefly. He changed my life, and I never told him, not once. The host looked down at the paper in his hand. He was holding something back. A beat passed. You might have a chance to say it now. Keanu looked up, confused. What do you mean? The host didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned slowly toward the audience, eyes scanning the back row. Some people only come into our lives once, but others, they wait quietly, silently, until the moment is right to be seen again. The camera panned ever so subtly to the last row of the audience. There, a silhouette, an older man, seated, hands folded, still no names, no confirmation, just presence. Keanu followed the gaze, but he didn't say a word. His breath caught, his shoulders tensed. Something in his eyes changed. Recognition, doubt, hope. It wasn't clear. The chapter closed with that moment, suspended in time. The student, the memory, the mystery in the shadows, and the weight of something left unsaid hanging between them. There are moments when the loudest sound in a room is a memory. That's what Keanu felt as he sat back on the studio couch, eyes still drawn to the back row where the shadow of a man, possibly the man, remained unmoving. No words, no gestures, just a quiet, watchful presence. The host, sensing the emotional fragility of the moment, shifted the conversation with care. Keanu, you've often been described as someone spiritual, quietly so. Has that always been part of who you are? Keanu didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. I don't know if I'd call it spiritual, but I've always listened for what wasn't being said. Even as a kid, I was more comfortable in silence than in sound. The audience was still, hanging on each word. Sometimes silence says more than any sentence, Keanu added. That teacher, he knew that too. The host leaned in, gently guiding the thread. Was there a moment, one that stayed with you? Keanu nodded slowly. His eyes softened, like he was watching an old film play in his mind. Yes, there was this day. My sister had just come home from the hospital. She was weak. I was terrified, but trying not to show it. At school, I couldn't concentrate. I was angry, closed off. I didn't talk to anyone. He paused. At the end of class, everyone left. I stayed behind, didn't even realize it until the room was empty. A small, nostalgic smile tugged at his lips. He walked over to my desk, didn't ask me to speak, didn't ask what was wrong. He just handed me an envelope. No explanation. Just nodded and walked out. The host asked softly, what was inside? Keanu reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. Carefully, deliberately, he pulled out a small, time-worn paper, folded into a tight square. This, he held it up gently. The audience leaned forward, as if seeing a relic. "I've kept it for all these years. It's a letter, a short one he wrote." Keanu cleared his throat and read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even silence has a sound, Keanu. Listen to your soul before the world drowns it out. You're not lost. You're learning how to hear." A breathless hush fell over the studio. Keanu pressed the letter to his chest. That line, it carried me. When my sister almost died, when I couldn't act, when I wanted to give up, it reminded me that quiet doesn't mean empty. It means sacred. The host blinked, visibly moved. "And you kept it all this time?" Keanu nodded. "Tucked inside a Bible I've carried with me since I was 17. I've moved across continents, changed cities, careers, relationships. But this letter always came with me." He paused, then said something unexpected. "Sometimes I didn't believe in myself, but I believed in the boy he wrote this to. That was enough to keep going." The audience was completely still, no coughs, no movement, just the sound of hearts opening. Then the host looked down, almost reluctant, and said, "Keanu, we received something earlier today. We weren't sure what it meant at first, but now I think you'll want to see it." He reached for an envelope on his table and handed it to Keanu. It looked old, cream-colored, slightly frayed at the edges. But the most striking thing was the handwriting. Keanu took one glance and froze. The camera zoomed slightly, catching the way his eyes widened, not with surprise, but with deep, soul-level recognition. He touched the handwriting with 2 fingers. This is the same." His voice broke. "The paper, the way he folds it, even the ink. This is just like the one I kept." He stared at the envelope for a long time, then slowly opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in the same delicate script. "Your silence spoke louder than any applause. I've heard every word you never said." Keanu blinked back tears. He looked up, straight toward the back row of the audience. The silhouette hadn't moved. Not a word, not a wave. But something had shifted. Maybe in the air, maybe in Keanu, maybe in both. The host placed a hand over his heart. "We don't always know who's listening, Keanu. But sometimes the ones who taught us how to hear never stopped listening." Keanu's hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter. Then, quietly, "If I could say something to him right now, I would say, thank you for seeing me, for hearing what I couldn't say, for teaching me that silence doesn't mean I'm alone." The camera captured his gaze, still locked on that one seat. The studio once again fell into reverent quiet. No movement, no music, just stillness. And somewhere in that stillness, the message, unspoken yet fully understood. The silence in the studio had taken on a new form. Not the pause before speech, but the space between worlds, between past and present, between a boy and the man he'd become, between a teacher and the student he once saved. Keanu sat with the second letter resting in his hands. He hadn't let go of it since reading those final words. "I've heard every word you never said." The host allowed a long moment of breath to pass before speaking. "Keanu, if that teacher were here today, if he could hear you now, what would you want to tell him?" Keanu exhaled deeply. His voice was steady, but his eyes trembled. "I'd tell him that he didn't just help me pass a class. He helped me stay alive. He helped me believe there was something inside me worth fighting for." A hush washed over the audience. "Every film I've made, every line I've spoken, every time I walked into a room where I felt like I didn't belong, I carried his voice with me." Keanu swallowed. "He told me I didn't need to be perfect. that being here was already enough. And sometimes, that's what kept me going when nothing else did. The host looked toward the back of the studio, his voice low. Would you tell him that now? Keanu followed the glance, his eyes returning to that same shadowed figure seated in the final row. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, if he could hear me now, I'd say, you saved me. Quietly, without ever asking for thanks, you gave me something no one else ever did. His voice cracked. You gave me me. The studio was stone silent. Then the host, careful, composed, turned toward the audience. Sometimes we go through life carrying gratitude we never get to express. A thank you unsaid for decades. A debt that isn't measured in favors, but in identity. He paused, his next words spoken slower. And sometimes, we get lucky enough to say it before it's too late. There was a subtle shift in lighting, gentle, almost imperceptible. As the camera widened to include the back row once more, the silhouette remained seated. But this time we could see a little more. The profile of a man with white hair, shoulders slightly curved forward, as if bearing a quiet weight. Hands clasped, resting on his lap. Eyes watching, still not revealed, still unnamed, but undeniably present. The host turned back to Keanu. If you could look into his eyes right now, what would you want him to see? Keanu didn't blink. That he mattered. That he made a difference, that every quiet moment he spent believing in a lost kid created a ripple that reached further than he'll ever know. His hands folded the letter again, slowly, with reverence. He was the first person who made me feel seen, truly seen. Another pause, then. And I never forgot him, not for a second. The camera cut again to the back row. This time the audience turned too, a soft rustling of bodies shifting, heads moving, eyes searching. The silhouette didn't flinch, didn't speak, but the presence, it was undeniable. The host closed his folder. One final question, Keanu. He looked the actor squarely in the eyes. If that teacher stood up right now, what would you do? Keanu's answer came without hesitation. I would walk to him. I would hug him. And I would say, every good part of me, every kind word I've ever spoken, every hand I've ever held, every moment I've ever helped someone else started with what you gave me. His voice was soft but clear. I just hope he knows that. And then, a movement. Small, deliberate. The figure in the back row placed one hand gently on the armrest. Keanu saw it. He stopped breathing for a moment. No one spoke. Not the host, not the audience, and not Keanu. Because sometimes, presence speaks louder than names, and the truth, the full, impossible, beautiful truth, was about to rise. The studio had gone still. The man from the last row, the one Keanu had spoken about with reverence and longing, was now standing, slowly, deliberately. And Keanu stood too. They looked at each other across the distance, as if time had collapsed and only this moment remained. The teacher walked down the aisle. The years showed in his steps, but there was purpose in every movement. Keanu stepped forward from the stage, meeting him halfway. No one spoke. Then came the embrace. Long, silent, powerful. When they pulled apart, Keanu's eyes were glassy. The teacher's hands trembled only slightly, but his gaze was firm. The host finally stepped in. Sir, may we ask your name? The man smiled gently, his voice worn but steady. Charles Whitmore. But to one young man here, I was just Mr. Whitmore. Keanu let out a breath that sounded like decades leaving his chest. Mr. Whitmore turned to him. Keanu, you weren't just a student. You were my reminder that even in grief, even in silence, there's reason to keep going. The audience listened, completely still. That year, I had lost my wife. I didn't think I could keep teaching. Everything in me wanted to shut down. But then you walked into my class, quiet, hurt, but full of something no one else saw. Keanu blinked, stunned. I never knew. You never said. I didn't need to, the teacher replied. You gave me purpose again, just by being there. Watching you fight to stay present, to try despite everything, it brought me back to life. Keanu swallowed hard. I thought I was just trying to survive. You were. But in doing that, you helped someone else survive too. They sat down together now, side by side on stage. The host asked gently, Mr. Whitmore, what made you believe in Keanu so deeply? The teacher turned to Keanu. Because I saw something in you I rarely saw. An empathy. Not the kind you talk about, the kind you live. He paused, then added, You didn't speak much in class, but I watched you stay behind to help others. You listened when no one else did. You noticed things that most kids ignored. That wasn't acting. That was who you were. Keanu looked at the floor, overcome. I always felt invisible, and then you looked at me like I mattered. Mr. Whitmore smiled. You did, and you still do. The moment was tender, deep, unshakable. Then Keanu asked, Why did you give me the lead role in that play? I could barely read. The teacher chuckled softly. Because I wasn't looking for perfect lines. I was looking for truth. And you, even back then, carried more truth in silence than most do with words. The audience was quiet. Many were crying. Keanu's voice cracked. I've wanted to thank you my whole life. I just didn't know how. Mr. Whitmore reached for his hand. This moment is enough. A beat. Then Keanu asked one last question. Why now? Why come here after all this time? Mr. Whitmore exhaled, eyes soft. Because I have one last thing to give you, something I've kept all these years. Keanu looked at him, confused. What is it? The teacher reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. It was old, faded, tied with string. He handed it to Keanu. This is yours, and it always has been. I was just waiting for the right time to return it. Keanu held the envelope carefully. His hands shook. The audience watched. Everyone knew whatever was inside would reveal something even Keanu didn't yet know about himself. And what came next would change everything. The room was still glowing from the reunion. Keanu stood beside Mr. Whitmore, still trying to process the flood of memories. The host gently broke the silence. Mr. Whitmore, when did you know Keanu was different? The old teacher smiled, eyes warm. There was a moment, small, quiet, but unforgettable. He turned to Keanu. Do you remember a boy in your class with cerebral palsy? Keanu nodded slowly. Yeah, he couldn't speak. Most kids ignored him, Mr. Whitmore continued. One day, during a group project, I watched you sit next to him. You held the book for him, helped him point, whispered the lines, and when the others laughed, you didn't stop. Keanu looked stunned. You saw that? I saw everything. That day I knew you weren't just kind, you were light. The studio was hushed. You didn't do it for praise. You didn't even think anyone noticed. But that's what makes it real. The goodness no one sees is the truest kind. Keanu lowered his head, deeply moved. I always felt like I was just surviving back then. I didn't think I mattered. Mr. Whitmore placed a hand on his shoulder. That's why I believed in you. Not because of your talent, but because of your heart. He paused, then added, You thought your silence was weakness, but it was your strength. You didn't speak loudly. You felt deeply, and that's why people listen to you now. Keanu took a moment, breathing in the weight of those words. I always wondered if I had any real worth back then. You made me feel like I did. The teacher smiled. You didn't have to become anything. You already were. Then, just as Keanu thought the moment had passed, Mr. Whitmore reached into his jacket. There's something else I've kept. I always meant to give it to you, but I waited until you were ready. He handed over a small bundle, carefully wrapped in brown paper and tied with an old string. Keanu looked down at it, hands trembling slightly. What is it? Mr. Whitmore's voice was soft. It's the last piece of your past, and maybe the truest part of who you are. I want you to open it before it's too late. Keanu nodded, heart pounding. As he held the bundle in his hands, something inside him knew whatever was inside would change how he saw everything. Keanu held the brown-wrapped bundle with care. The string was faded, the paper soft with age, like something that had waited years to be opened. Mr. Whitmore nodded silently. Keanu untied the knot. Inside a single folded sheet of lined paper, Keanu recognized it instantly. This is my essay, he whispered. The first time I really tried. He unfolded it, voice catching as he read the title aloud. When I grow up, I want to be someone who makes pain smaller. He began reading. I want to be someone who understands people, even when they can't say what hurts. I don't think I'll be famous, but I want to be kind. I want to be the kind of person who makes a room feel safer. Keanu looked up, stunned. You kept this? Mr. Whitmore smiled, eyes misty. Because I knew it wasn't just an assignment. It was who you already were. The studio was breathless. When I read this back then, Mr. Whitmore continued, I saw someone who didn't want to be great. He wanted to be good. That's rarer and more powerful. Keanu placed a hand over his heart. I thought acting was pretending, but the truth is, I've just been trying to live up to this page ever since. Mr. Whitmore nodded. You've already surpassed it. Keanu turned to the audience. Fame didn't shape me. This man did. With one quiet belief, spoken at the right time. He turned back to Mr. Whitmore. You saw me when I was invisible, and now the world sees you. The host stepped forward, visibly moved. What made you hold on to it all these years, Mr. Whitmore? The teacher's voice was soft. Because I knew one day he'd need to remember who he truly was. The audience stood, not clapping, just honoring. Then Keanu raised the mic one last time. If today you had the chance to thank the person who saved you in silence, would you do it? He looked around the room. Sometimes one word spoken in time is worth more than a lifetime of success.